So today I invite veteran adventure coach Joe Bonington on the show. And inside he shares some really amazing philosophies around training for adventure. He shares some great information about anyone who's aspiring to get fit for the trail and for mountains. And he also gives some great advice around how people can train at home to keep themselves trail fit. So gear up. It's an absolutely amazing episode and jam-packed with value. Let's get into it. So welcome, Joe. Welcome to the show, mate.
Oh, thanks, mate. It's really good pleasure to be here.
Absolutely stoked to have you on. You've been a little bit of an inspiration to me from an adventure coach perspective. For the guys listening to the show, Joe is going to give you a bit of background in a minute, but he runs an adventure gym literally down the road from me. Like, he's been doing it for quite a while and is really a strong leader in the adventure space. So I'm absolutely stoked to have you involved. Talk a little bit about what you do, and then just dive into a little bit about what hikers can be doing in this particular time. So do you mind starting off with just telling the listeners a little bit about yourself, your background in the world of trekking and adventure, and then what you actually do?
Okay. It's quite a long story. So I'm 52 years old now, and I've got a family background in adventure. My old man is a prolific and well-known mountaineer, but after childhood, I didn't continue down that route. I actually went down a dimmer and darker path for quite some time. Dad back home in the UK was very famous, and in the 60s and 70s and 80s. And I was very embarrassed as a teenager by that. So I actually didn't tell people what my surname was, and wouldn't mention who I was. I then and I went opposite direction, got myself into a lot of trouble, had a very troubled childhood, and it wasn't until in my early 20s that I hit absolute rock bottom and had done some quite stupid things, and I went on an expedition, went on a trip with my dad. I think my dad was trying to get me out of this black hole, and we went to Kilimanjaro. And I'd grown up climbing. I'd grown up rock climbing and out on the fells and the hills of northern England all my life. But I'd just had this break in the middle where I'd gone off and got involved in all kinds of not so good or sociable things. And so Dad took me back out into the wild, and it was the first time that I actually really got to appreciate why my dad did what he did and the therapeutic side of the mountains and the power of the mountains. So we climbed Kilimanjaro together. We went not by the normal route. Dad being Dad, we actually went round the back. We went via a route that had only been climbed a couple of times and had been previously off limits a lot. So we went over the back of the Credna Glacier, which unfortunately now, because of global warming, is hardly there. And we climbed up. We climbed up to the down, dropped over the glacier. We had a bit of ice climbing, and then down into the crater, then up across the crater and up the other side. And we had other members of my family there, my dad's half-brother and also my brother. Now, they weren't going so strongly, so they were behind. And we got to just below the summit. And I turned to my dad. My dad said, "Oh, look, we better wait here for the others." And I said, "No, Dad, I need to go up there and spend some time by myself." And Dad, I went off, and I didn't know my dad was crying his eyes out. And we got up to the top, and I felt the power of this mountain, and everything came up. I cried for a lost childhood. I cried for all the friends and all the funerals I've been to from mountaineers and everybody who died and all of this, and everybody who'd had an effect on my life, and had this massive surge of emotion come through me, and just sat on top of Kilimanjaro by myself, sobbing my eyes out. And then Dad came up a little bit later. He totally understood, totally got it. We just hung on to each other, clung to each other at the top. And that was the start of a journey for me, a start of a journey that was about personal development and about healing myself. And I found through that I also had a talent for engaging other people. So when I went back, it was a long process. Now, I was in the music industry for a number of years, but I got myself really fit and emigrated to Australia in '98 with my Australian wife. And in 2000, I went off to the Himalayas. I was competing in ultrathons and things like that by then, but just doing stuff for myself and some work just with friends. And we were in the Kanchenjunga region, and we were climbing an unclimbed peak, and I saw people there. There was only a few people there. The adventure business isn't what it is now. And there was only, in the whole 5 weeks we were in the region, we actually only saw 5 other Western parties. And I saw there some people who should have been looking up at the mountains around them, and they were so buggered that they were just looking at their feet. They were shattered. A couple of them looked reasonably ill and suffering from the effects of altitude. And I thought, there's got to be something here. There's got to be something for me here. I'd spent the last 2 years in Australia working in conservation. When I moved from the UK, I wanted to get out of the shallowness of the music industry and do something worthwhile with my time. So I'd engaged in conservation work and bush regeneration whilst I was trying to work out what to do next. And it was on that trip, it just dawned on me, and it hit me like a light. I could create a model where I could train people for getting outdoors and getting into adventure, etc. So that was in 2000. And so I came back, I qualified as a personal trainer. And I then very quickly realized that in those days, like I said, that the adventure business wasn't what it is now, that I was going to starve to death if I was just looking for adventurous clients, especially when I was based in DY on the northern beaches. And so I started doing what everybody does. I cut my teeth. I worked in studios. I then got a franchise with Fitness First. I was training stressed out executives, overweight mums, and doing all this. But I always had my eye on 2 things. One, I was a bit of a geek for the science of strength and performance. So looking, how can I improve people's performance, especially around the things that I love doing, which was getting outdoors into the wilderness, because there was nothing. There was no papers, no research, etc. At that time, or there was very little. And so I was looking at other papers and stuff around Olympic-based athletes and in the strength and conditioning journals, and seeing what I could apply to the sports that I loved. And I was always keeping my eye out for people who wanted to train for adventures. And then they started coming a few apart, here and there, and a couple of people who wanted to walk Kokoda, and other people wanting to go to Everest Basecamp. And then in 2008 or 2009, I was approached by a guy called Stephen Bock, who's a real estate agent, overweight, and who'd had a dream of climbing Everest for 20 years. And I'd been recommended to him, and we started to work together. Now, through him, I actually ended up training the whole of the Australian component of an 8-person climbing team. And the 5 that I trained over here, they summited Everest. It was the largest amount of Australians on Everest summit at one time. And then things really started to snowball from there. And I was looking at other sports as well. So I wasn't just looking at mountaineering. I was looking at trekking, also adventure racing and ultrathons, trail running, etc. Basically anything that got people out into the outdoors. And so, so that's basically how I got started. I then left Fitness First in 2011, and I started my own a small gym called Joe's Garage in Balgowlah on the Northern Beaches. And then then a few years ago, we opened through another one. Somebody who I'd coached became a bit of an angel investor, a guy called Henry Talbot, who wanted to I trained him for the Kokoda, and he got involved with this and helped create Joe's Basecamp as it is now, which is a big 600-meter facility with an altitude chamber, climbing a small bouldering wall, an adventurers club, etc., which is the place that you've been and seen yourself. So, and we've been going from strength to strength ever since.
Yeah, amazing. And it's such a fantastic gym walking in those doors. And for anyone who's been in a gym, you often walk in, you see the treadmills, you see the ellipticals, you see everyone plugging away as a standard gym everywhere in the world. But you go into Joe's Basecamp and it's just built for adventure. You got this big map on the wall. And it's just like everyone's welcoming, and it's a beautiful place. Like really, really inspiring what you're doing.
Thank you. Actually, the other thing I forgot to mention is whilst all this was going on, I also have a passion for sharing my experiences. So I've been also leading and running treks for years as well. So all through Nepal and through Bhutan as well, and more recently Kokoda. And that has been absolutely fantastic, being able to do that and share those experiences and take people to places where seeing people, especially the ones who've never been to altitude before, who've never been into the mountains before, and getting to the end of their destination and seeing them look around, think people who thought, oh God, I couldn't do this, and never imagined that they'd actually get there, and sharing that experience with them as they look up at the mountains around them just blows my mind. And there's one of the big reasons why I do what I do.
So coming off all this experience and all these helping so many people with all particular types of adventures, are there any particular guiding philosophies that you have when it comes to physical preparation for hikers, trekkers, and other adventure athletes?
Yeah, I do. I have this model that I use that I've kind of come up with is I try and turn everybody into a Landrover. That basically I see Landrovers as being the kind of vehicle for adventure. There's no self-respecting film going through jungles or across continents or with David Attenborough in or whatever that doesn't contain a Land Rover. So what I try and do, there's basically 6 components that I look at. And I break them into 2 parts. I call them building protocols, and I call them binding protocols. And the principles they're both codependent on each other. And I'll talk about the building principles first. So the building principles are the ones that you'd think of. That's the physical, the real physical side. So we do that by building our aerobic conditioning. That's the engine of your Land Rover. Okay, so we want as big an engine as possible. We want something really, really chunky. And then we have our strength and flexibility. That's the chassis of our Land Rover. And that wants to be really, really strong, but it also needs to be really flexible as well, so that we can it can bend and change and take the punishment that it's going to get through whatever trip, adventure, etc. that you're putting it through. And then there's work capacity, which is that's the icing on the cake. That's the turbo. The trouble is nowadays, a lot of people, now it's very much needed, but what a lot of people do is they spend way too much time working on the turbo because that's the fun and exciting stuff. That's going and doing your HIIT classes or your high intensity, the stuff that really gets a sweat up. And it's not necessarily something that we need to be doing all the time. We want to actually be building a larger engine first before we do that. So those 3 components that we look at. And then after that, we look at what I call the binding principles, which are the bits that hold it all together. So with our Landrover, you need to service the Landrover. You need to service it regularly to keep it healthy, to keep it going. And that's your recovery. That is using proper recovery protocols. That's actually taking decent rests. That's stretching, doing non-sweat sessions like restorative yoga, like having ice baths and cold showers and fun stuff like that. And then we've got our fuel. You need to put decent fuel into your Land Rover as well. We want premium grade fuel. So that's your nutrition. So it's eating for the event that you're doing, whether it's climbing, trekking, running, etc. And there's little tweaks and nuances between all three, but the basics, the foundations, the principles are actually all the same. And then the last thing that you need for your Land Rover, you need a driver. You need a really, really good driver. And that driver is you. That's your mindset. That's your headspace. And that is one thing that people, I'd say so many people forget about. If we can practice things to improve our mindset, improve our focus, it actually improves then our whole process, the whole process of training. It actually keeps us more steady and guides us and keeps us on our true north throughout our training, but also makes us more appreciative, both of the training that we're doing for our adventure, but then also when we're on our adventure itself as well. It makes us more appreciative of where we are, more appreciative of the landscapes that we find ourselves in, the cultures and the people that we find ourselves around, etc. And gives us, the more aware we are, the more grateful we are, the more gratitude we have, and the more mindfulness we have, the more we will take away from any experience.
I love that analogy. Like when I first heard you describe it, I was like, you know what? I really, really like that. That breaks down everything so well. So then in your experience, what is one thing around physical preparation which isn't really done very well in the adventure world?
I think that's not done well enough in the adventure world is the physical preparation itself. A lot of the time, in the old days, people who are my age and above tend to think, oh, you should just get out there and do what you do. We didn't do this in the old days. And it's not because we couldn't, it's because we didn't know what we know now. The field of strength and conditioning has come on so much. It was driven forward by big money-making sports and the Olympics and track and field sports, etc. And then people have taken bits and pieces like that and had a look at outdoor and adventure sports and thought, how can we adapt this and how can we change that? And so with this growth in professional sports and amateur sports and the Olympics and winter sports, you ended up with people like Scott Johnson, who is a S&C coach for the American ski team, adapting things. He was working closely with a guy called Steve House, who's very famous and prolific mountaineer in the American mountaineer and alpinist in the 80s, who also worked with another guy who was climbing a lot at the time, called Mark Twight, who went on to found a gym called Jim Jones. These guys really drove strength and conditioning in our world forward. Nowadays we have more expendable income, we have more access to these places, but we also have little time. So we're wanting to, we've got all this knowledge available to us. So what we're wanting to do is to get the most that we possibly can out of the sports and the activities that we love doing. So we now can do strength and conditioning properly. And the reason why you'd want to do this, and the reason why I have to kind of pull up some of the oldies, is say, look, yeah, you can just do it and go and do what you do. And that's fantastic. Efficient. If you were more proficient, wouldn't you enjoy it more? Aren't you going to get more out of those trips? So that's what I do, and that's what I've been doing is helping people build a foundation. If I can just get them to build a really, really solid foundation, I can guarantee them that they will have a better experience no matter what kind of adventure it is that they're going into.
What's maybe a couple of things that trekkers and adventure athletes, they sort of might do a little bit of at the moment. They might see a little bit of benefit of it, but they're not really doing enough of it, or they might just not see the real value behind it. Is there anything you could come to mind there?
Yeah, there's quite a lot of things, to be honest, but proper strength training. So the trouble is, there's a lot of noise out there. You know, the fitness industry is massive. And so what people do is they'll just go, okay, well, I need to do strength training. And they go and join their local F45, or they'll go down to Fitness First or Anytime Fitness and stand there looking around the weights room thinking, oh, my God, you know, as they see some big Neanderthal bloke with joined together eyebrows and biceps the size of your head, and they'll be told, oh, okay, I want to start strength training, and there's some buff PT will come up to them and say, oh, okay, yeah, you want to do 3 sets of 12 of this, and we want to increase your muscle mass and all this kind of stuff, and they're taking them down the wrong path. There's a big difference between exercise and training. All training contains some form of exercise, but not all exercise is training. People have really, really got to remember that. We are training for something. We are training for performance. We are training to improve at the things that we want to do. If you're doing any uphill sport, whether it's walking, running, climbing, etc., you don't want to have the pecs the size of dinner plates. You don't want to have an extra 10 kilos of muscle just for the sake of it. Yes, you want to be strong, but you want to have relative strength. You want to have power to body weight output. You want to have conditioned yourself so that when you go up those hard, gnarly and steeper inclines, that you're clearing lactate efficiently so that your legs don't get heavy, and so you're not so sore the next morning when you've got to get up and do it all over again, except this time you might be wetter and you might be colder and you might be higher. So so doing proper strength training, doing the right kind of strength training is really, really important. And that has nuances to it. You know, we do things like helping people create structural balance first, so to getting rid of asymmetries between left and right. Then we build a strength foundation. Now, a strength foundation, that is one bit where you could actually, there's only so many ways to skin a cat. So that is where we're doing things like squats and deadlifts and stuff like that. There's people say, oh, but that's not sport specific. That's not specific to running. Yeah, no, it's not. And I know it's not, but it's about building the foundation. It's about building a larger base. Excuse me. It's about building a large foundation for you to then do build your specificity on top of. And if you have a stronger base, and you're stronger through just generally your maximal strength, your ligamental and structures and your connective tissues, then when we get onto the specifics, when we're training for specificity, we're going to be able to do it more efficiently and get an even better result.
Yeah, and that's a really important point to make. The discussion around specificity and deadlifts and squats and all of that, it just gets very, very confusing and complex. So breaking it down like that, simply saying that's going to make you more efficient at doing the specific stuff, I think that's a really, really important point to make for many people listening today.
And is that something that you find with your clients as well?
It tends to be the people that I work with personally tend to already, they accept what I'm giving them, and they're pretty happy to do things like that. But it tends to be the people who might not be working with specifically, but someone who listened to the podcast or see some content and they just can't really wrap their heads around a little bit about that. So that's very, very important point to make there.
Yeah. The other thing as well that I think that people could do more of is actually training their energy systems correctly and properly as well. I think so you've got two schools of thought. You've got the people who will just go out and walk and that's it, and they'll just rely on that, and then you've got the people who just want to go hard and think harder, faster is better. And we work with you've heard the term Pareto's principle, and for the listeners out there who don't know what Pareto's principle is, it's basically the 80-20 rule. So with our energy system training, virtually all of the adventure sports are endurance-based sports by default, which means, they are about enduring, they're about going over a long period of time, sometimes day after day after day, generally over 90 minutes. And with the adventure endurance sports, they're all submaximal sports. When you're plodding along for 8 hours, your heart rate isn't maxing out, by any stretch of the imagination. So what we want to do is actually work to that. We want to become really, really efficient fat burning machines. So because it's when we're in that lipolytic state, when we can burn fat as a fuel, because it's a really, really good accessible fuel, that we have hundreds of thousands of calories on us. We don't have to keep on shoving bloody gels and synthetic rubbish down our throats every 20 minutes, etc., to do as we do when we're training really, really hard. So training efficiently and training properly so that we encourage that will actually give us more endurance, so that we don't tap into those glycogen reserves, of which we've only got roughly around 2,000 calories sitting in our liver and our muscles, so that we actually use those when we really, really need them. And also, if we are working at a reasonable intensity over a day, those stores actually last longer.
And then going off that point is what's some basic principles around developing that particular type of energy system and that particular type of fat burning? What do people have to be aware of there?
Okay, so this is the bit where we butt heads with people a lot, and the people who actually stick to it, they just thank us so much for it. But it's the general rule of thumb is you don't want to work for most of the time, especially whilst you're building your foundation. We believe a foundation takes about 12 weeks to build. Is you want to spend 80% of your time working at around 75% of the max of your heart rate. Okay, so that is not very high. And so you'll get people going, oh, yeah, look, it means I kept on having to walk and all of that. So I just thought I'd run. Well, as soon as you start doing that, you stuff it up. It's what we do. We call it MAF testing, maximum aerobic function testing. We'll get somebody to run or walk 5 kilometers at 75% of their max heart rate. And then we'll see how fast they do it, staying at that. And then we'll get them to train in this way. And 12 weeks later, we'll test them again. And guaranteed, they can go a lot faster whilst their heart rate has stayed at the same. Now, we know that at 75% of your heart rate, you are not burning glycogen. You are just burning. It's that aerobic system. We're working at aerobic threshold. Okay, so we are just burning fat. But it takes a long time. And unfortunately, in this world, people are so et up with quick fixes. You can't bypass this, mate. You can't get past being able to jack up your fat burning system. It has to be done slowly. So if you're suddenly 2 months out from a trek and you think, oh shit, I better start training now. We still tell people, just work on your foundation. Don't worry about doing, smashing out lots of hills and stuff like that. Just work on the foundation and just keep on building it like that. And you'll be amazed over time. They do reckon it takes 2 years to build really properly and solidly, but you just keep on doing it. And the more time, and that's not to say we don't do any of the other stuff. We do the turbo, the work capacity, but it takes only those hills and stuff should only be, and at high intensity should only be 20% of your total volume.
And then for the listeners, so you're saying for developing this particular stuff, we want to be working roughly below 75% of the max heart rate. For the listeners here, you go?
Yeah, so you want to be working out. So you don't want to be if you drop another 10%, then you're working at kind of recovery levels. So we want to be working as close to 70% as you can. But if you see, if you got your heart rate monitor on, you spike up, you need to slow down straight away. You want to spend as little time as possible above 75%. Another way of doing it is 180 minus your age. They call that the Maffetone method. And then what you can do with the Maffetone method is you do 180 minus your age, and then it's if you had a really good season last year, then you can add 5 or 10 beats a minute. If you are if you've had really good 2 seasons, then you add 10 beats a minute. If you had a good season last season and you're fit, strong, conditioned, add 5 beats a minute. If you're just getting into it but you're reasonably fit, just do 180 minus your age. And anybody, no matter how fit you are, if you're coming out of illness or if you're deconditioned, then it's -5 off that. So that's just another way of achieving the same thing. I used to do a lot of Maffetone method. Nowadays, just for simplicity with people, we just tend to work around the heart rate zones, the 75% minus your age, because if people have got polar heart rates, they've got Garmin heart rate monitors, they've got Sunto heart rate monitors, those are easier to set than the 180 minus your age.
Obviously, the world's in a bit of an interesting situation at the moment, to say the least. And I would say most hikers and trekkers and adventure athletes out there are going to be stuck at home at the time of listening at the moment. They might be getting outdoors for a little bit of exercise, but the majority of their stuff is going to be home-based. At the moment, what do you think some areas of training or types of training would be a good area for them to focus on?
Yeah, look, I think you can still do your aerobic training outdoors, which is great. It is going to get a lot harder if we go into a full lockdown and we can't. I saw that somebody sent me a Strava thing of some Italian guy. I think he'd run a marathon on his balcony, which was like, he just had these 10 meters at a time, even less than that. So that'd be pretty tough. But we can focus on doing the strength work, and we can focus on the mobility, which is really, really important. Something that I haven't talked about much today as well. So working on the strength and the mobility. So that's the chassis of our Landrover. If we think of this time as being a good time as an analogy, we're like a classic car in a garage. It's a time for restoration. So we can work on the chassis and get our chassis absolutely awesome, so we can spend time focusing on our strength work, focusing on our mobility. Utilize what you've got around you. If you've got a kettlebell or some pair of dumbbells and stuff, that's absolutely brilliant. We can use steps and seats and kitchen chairs to modify how we're doing things, to do step downs and step ups onto, etc. We do a thing called the 1,000-foot step test. You can easily do that onto the top of a milk crate or onto a stool or a kitchen bench or something like that. That's actually something I stole from Steve House and Scott Johnson. It's a great little test. It is 1,000 feet, which is exactly for the rest of the world, it is 305 meters. And you basically measure 3/4 of the height of your shin. So basically from the floor, you go up to find 3/4 of the height of your shin, measure that, and then divide that into 305,000, isn't it? Yeah, because it's if we're trying to find how many centimeters. So measure it in centimeters, create a step the same height, and then divide that amount of steps into 305 meters. Yeah. And you can regularly test yourself on that. Now, that is something that you can do as your high intensity piece. Like once a week, you could test yourself and see how long it takes you to do. You can add weight to it. If you've got a pair of mountaineering boots or your trekking boots, you can wear those as well. That's a great thing to do. And it's just step up, step down, and keep on counting them. I've got an awful memory. My mind wanders as well. I'm a bit ADHD. And so I have to really, really focus hard to keep a really good track of the numbers. So, but yeah, that's a good thing. And just on that point as well, if you do it, you never have to remeasure your shin again. The length of your shin, no matter how old you get, the length of your shin won't change. So once you've set up your number, that's the number that you will always test at for life. It drives me. We have some people here who keep on forgetting to write it down. And I swear they end up with different numbers of steps that they're doing every single time they test it. And then, yeah, just doing some out and out strength movements. Some calisthenics is really, really good as well. If you haven't got weights and stuff, running through some calisthenics and body weight movement, etc. And get your backpack out, load it up with all those bags of rice that you've been hoarding, and then put what will be your carrying weight in it. And then do some squats and do some lifting it from the floor over onto your shoulder and things like that.
I use similar test for the step test for a lot of my clients, and I'm the same as you. Like, keeping track of those steps are a nightmare. So I had to go out and buy a rep clicker, and then I was doing it. I was like, I'm getting this so messed up and wrong. Like, I cannot do this. So now I give it responsibility to the client. I'm like, look, I'm not even going to try. This is out of my hands. You've got to get close because it's an absolute nightmare.
I know exactly what you mean. So yeah, we don't use a rep clicker. What we tend to do is we'll set up a whiteboard next to our client, and then we just put lines across, and then basically every time every time they've done a rep or 10 reps or however they want to count it, they just put their thumb through the whiteboard. So they'll end up with a line with lots of marks, and then we can just count the marks off to see how many they've done. So it might be 10s at a time, 20s at a time, 50s at a time, whatever they're comfortable with.
Yeah, fair. Oh, that's a good way of doing it. So before we're going to wrap up I want to dive into a little bit about what you guys are currently doing at Joe's Basecamp with your online training, because you've got a gym which is dedicated to adventure athletes. The gyms are currently closed in Australia, so you've transitioned in a very interesting way to keep on delivering training to your athletes. So could you explain a little bit about how you're going about that, and give us a little bit of a rundown?
Yeah, okay. Look, there's a few things that I do. So I am a big believer in giving back and trying to, this country has been fantastic for me. I've just become a citizen, by the way, and I'm trying to give back as much as I can. So we are giving away free content as well. So some people are really struggling. The people who I think are really struggling harder are kids. So for all my little adventurous kids out there, we're running a live stream at 9 a.m. every day on YouTube and on our YouTube channel. And that is, we teach the kids a skill, and then we combine that skill into a workout, and then we run a workout. So the whole thing, including warm up and everything, is over, done and dusted in 30 minutes. And that is then up there all day. So you can either watch it live, or you can then just, it stays up there on YouTube as well. So we're doing that for people. And I think that's as much for the parents as for the kids as well. Trying to keep the parents sane. That the kids are just these pent up balls of energy that are, I've got two daughters, and they're, starting to get at each other and niggle at each other. They're on their screens for their school now, and then they're getting off their screens for school and going onto the screens for social. And, so we have to use a screen to do it, but at least they're doing something functional and they're not glued eyes straight in front of their screen, sitting down. They're doing something that's really going to help them. And then hopefully that's going to take a bit of stress off the parents as well. So we're doing that. We do a Basecamp daily as well. So this is either sweat, non-sweat. And what I mean by that is it might be just a short little tip, a 5-minute core workout that you could do. It might be a 7-minute just energy booster. It might be some isometric exercises, or it might be completely non-sweat. It might be some recovery methods. It might be how to stretch a certain part of the body. It might be how to increase your metabolic efficiency and your fat loss, because now everybody's stuck at home. All the women in our community are all saying, "Oh, I'm just eating so much, and I keep on going to the kitchen cupboard every time that I take a phone call or stuff like that." And so just a few tips on how to improve their metabolic efficiency or kinds of things. So just really, really short nuggets that are just free out to everybody. And then with the Basecamp community itself, so the people who are wanting to train with us, we've got a number of things. So we're running. We have a thing called Basecamp Workouts, which is where our members jump onto a live streamed workout that we do with them every day, and we. And that they can interact. There's other people on that call as well through a Facebook group, but it's all like really professionally shot and live streamed, which is awesome. And then we're also running personal training and small group personal training online as well. So there, for our personal training, we're actually going through the sessions with them in real time. And then for our small group personal training, we're checking in with them for 15 minutes and twice a week, and then also doing a group call with them, etc. as well. So we're doing those as well. So we're hitting it up on a number of levels to just try and keep people moving, and people not letting people forget that. Don't worry, when we get through all of this, the mountains are still going to be there. This is just a blip. It is what it is. The world's resetting itself, I feel, at the moment, and we've just got to just flow, and it is what it is.
Yeah, absolutely, and I couldn't agree more there. And trying to find some type of positive in this time, and training can be a great outlet. And as you said, once we get out the other end, those mountains are going to be calling for everyone. So why not be ready?
Yeah, exactly. I think with that, it's a lot of people get a lot out of the mountains, and I'm just hoping that at the end of this, we've all, as humanity, has taken a lot from this planet, and I'm not sure how much it's given back. And I'm just hoping that when we're on the other side of this, that people will have learned, like this self-isolation that we've had to put ourselves through, these times to reflect. And when we do get out into those high and remote places and out into those wilderness spaces, those places that really give us so much, that they can have a think about what they can do to give back. I want people to, once we get on the other side of this, if you are going on trips, please make sure you're doing it in a sustainable way, and that you're respecting the cultures and the people who you are amongst. And not just respecting them, you're actually physically giving back to them in as big a way as you can. I work very closely with the Australian Himalayan Foundation. I'm honoured and to be one of their ambassadors, which is something that I'm very, very proud of and very, very passionate about. And I just hope that at the end of all of this, people like that can really be, it's people like that you can go to really, really give back to for the trips and everything and the adventures that you're going on.
I hope people take that on board, and thank you for sharing that.
Pleasure.
But thank you so much for coming on the show today, Joe. I really, really appreciate you taking the time, and I really appreciate you sharing some of your insights around this type of thing, and it's your amazing story, and then just all this information has been fantastic. So for any of the listeners who are interested in learning a little bit more about Joe's Basecamp and the online stuff that he's doing at the moment, I'll leave a bunch of links down below in the show notes, and you can check that out. But thanks again for coming on, Joe. I really appreciate it.
Rowan, it's always a pleasure to talk to you, mate. You're doing a really, really good thing, and you've got an amazing community, and I think your podcast's absolutely fantastic.
Oh, fantastic. Appreciate that. You've been listening to the Training for Trekking podcast. So if you've enjoyed this episode, please remember to subscribe, rate, and review us in iTunes. So thanks for getting involved, and we'll see you on the next one.